Welcome back to another episode of Treasures Galore. My name is Michael, and I am your host as always. And this video is going to be about why I believe that treasure chest is hidden in Montana. Now, I know me and Carter with the House Husband Diaries did a live video this last Sunday, and we went back and forth on he believes it's in New Mexico, I believe it's in Montana, and we went off on, God knows how many different, topics. So I know I went over that. I just kind of wanted to bring up some things that were mentioned in the video, and then a few things that I didn't get to mention that I thought were important, and I completely forgot to say them. So, watch this if you want, or if you've seen the live video, I'm going to go over a lot of things. But most importantly, in this video, I'm going to go over what's in the books. Like I said, I'm a book purist. I always tie everything back to the thrill of the chase. Not necessarily a book purist, but what I mean by that is that I pretty much use everything, but always try to tie it back to the thrill of the chase. Because that's what he always tells us to do. Study the clues that are in that book. And he said that 3 times. Study the clues in the book. So, anyways, I'm just going to go over a few arguments, I guess, if that's what you want to call it, about why is in New Mexico, and I'm going to go over these real quick. So, a point that was made was Forrest Fenn made his wealth in Santa Fe, and that's where he accumulated all of his wealth, and he would want to give it back to the you know the home state, or his state that he made all of his money in. Well, that very well may be true, but successful people are always talking and thinking about the past and pivotal moments that shaped their life and got them on the route, and that's the way that their success came from. So I don't necessarily see that argument. There's always, you listen to all these successful people, they're always talking about the coach that they had, or their father, or some other father figure in their life, or mother, or pivotal moment where something clicked in their head, and that brought them on the route that they went, and that's how they were successful. So successful people are always reminiscent of the things that made them, and made them who they are, and how they came about, and stuff like that. So, and then another argument is, Yellowstone isn't subtle, and I completely 100%, understand why people would think, if he's writing a memoir and he's hiding the chest, and he says that, a chapter is called "In Love with Yellowstone," that, that's just way too obvious, and it very well may be, but if he just gives the state. He can give the state. If you can't find where Warm Waters Halt, the state doesn't matter. Because Montana is a huge, there's a lot of, how many square miles are in the search area in Montana? There's a lot. So if we're simplifying, and in Cynthia's new video, he says that people are overcomplicating the poem, but he also brought up, which I thought was interesting, people are overcomplicating the book. So what if he is really giving us that he is in love with Yellowstone and that area, which he continuously tells us, and I'm going to bring those up in my points to come. But he also said there's a couple of good hints, and what if what if him giving the state is one of those good hints? But he also brings up that there are hints to help you with the clues in the poem. Well, I don't believe the state is a clue at all, and I feel like he could give us a state, and maybe he did, and still people are overlooking it and thinking it's in different states. So another one is Yellowstone is too far away. It's 900 miles. There's no way that Forrest Fenn could have brought a treasure chest up there without Peggy knowing that he took the chest, and it's just way too far for a 79 or 80-year-old man to go. Well, we all know that Forrest Fenn not just only spent his childhood up there, but also he would visit Yellowstone and the Cody area, and Lander, and all these areas in Wyoming, not just from his childhood, but all throughout his life, up until he tells us in 2006, he would drive up there, almost every summer, and he drove up there, to do that interview. So he's been going up to Yellowstone throughout his whole entire life. So, and he also said that no matter what, he was going to make this treasure hunt work, whatever it takes. And you also got to look at, who Forrest Fenn is. I mean, he's the dude that got shot down twice in Vietnam, and he's the dude that flew his airplane and landed it on a golf course, and hurried up before the police could show up. Now this is an eccentric dude, and you don't think he could have made a trip up to Yellowstone or Montana and hidden a treasure chest when he was 79 or 80? Absolutely. What if he even took that trip with his wife and then went out and did something for an afternoon and said he was going to go do some fishing, and he went and hid the treasure chest and hid the chest in the car or in a bag where she wouldn't see, or under the seat, or wherever. He could have done that also. He tells us that Peggy doesn't know within, I believe, 6 months, don't quote me on that, of him hiding the treasure chest, because he had it in his vault, and he wrote 2 books that were, if he stacked them up, it was the exact same height. So he had a cloth over it, and that's how when he hid the chest, he put those books under there and covered it, so his wife wouldn't know, and be able to conclude, okay, well, the treasure chest is gone now, and he went here, so that's probably where the treasure chest is. So he was smart about that, and he wanted to protect her for her not knowing where the treasure chest is. And, I completely 100%, understand that. Also, only 1,000 copies were made in New Mexico. Like I said in my live video, he had no idea how popular this treasure hunt would go. He had no idea, and it really didn't gain a lot of traction right off the bat. And so, I think it took a few years for it to really, take off the way it did. And so, only 1,000 copies, and it's strictly in New Mexico. Well, him and Dorothy are good friends with, and she owns a independent bookstore. I don't know about you, but around my parts there aren't very many independent bookstores. I believe there are only one, I think, and then there's the big Barnes & Noble. So he was helping his friend out. He donated all the book proceeds to her, minus 10% for the cancer fund, and I'm sure that it really did good for that bookstore, and maybe it saved that bookstore. So it was kind of Forrest Fenn's way of giving back to a friend, where he's not making money off of it, but his friend is. So, and you're able to order the book online, and maybe he wanted New Mexicans to, maybe experience some of the places that he did, Montana, and that's where the treasure chest is hidden. Get up there where my heart's at, and, go search for it. So those are just a few points that were brought up, and I just wanted to reiterate what I said in the video. So another one that A Gypsy's Kiss brings this up, and a lot of people who searching New Mexico always bring this up too, is that Forrest Fenn discovered the Rocky Mountains in 2013. Well, that is not true. And Why Must I Go did a video about this, and I didn't catch it because I've always thought that the treasure chest was hidden up there, so I didn't really think much about it. But, in 2011, with the interview with Gotti Schwartz, he told him that just because I said it's in the mountains north of Santa Fe doesn't mean that it's hidden in New Mexico. It could go all the way up to Canada. So, and of course, that's before he cut off, at the Canadian border. But I just thought that was interesting. In 2011, he was telling people, hey, it can be, it's not just, it could be in New Mexico, but, the search area goes up way far north up through the Rocky Mountains. So to me, that point isn't really valid. I've heard that, if I kidnapped your daughter and I said I'm somewhere in the mountains north of Santa Fe, would you think Montana? Well, if I kidnapped your daughter and I said, here, I wrote this book, and it's straightforward, and people are overcomplicating it, and here you go, I'll give you a hint, you have to follow these clues to find your daughter. And I always, mostly talked about Yellowstone and Montana and how, important that place was to me. Honestly, that's probably the first place that I would look. And then he's always bringing up his childhood, it feels like. He's always talking about his childhood experiences in the mountains. Now, why doesn't he talk about, some hikes and stuff that he's found in New Mexico and, some awesome experiences that he had when he was older about, hiking in the mountains north of Santa Fe? He never really does. To me, the only two mentions, and I might be wrong, there might be another one, but I went through all my notes and everything, and I've only found two mentions of being in the mountains in Santa Fe, north of Santa Fe, and that is Tea with Olga, where he flies and drops the ashes on Taos Mountain, and Mountain Man, when he's near Mount Taylor in New Mexico. So those are the only two mentions that I believe he talks about being in the mountains. Now we know it's not hidden near structure, it is in the mountains, so, and that's all he talks about with being in the mountains is, Yellowstone and Wyoming and Montana. So I'm going to start going through the books and, excuse me, and we always have to pay attention what he says and how he talks about things. It's not just all the mentions about Yellowstone, it's how he talks about it. I mean, he's said over and over again how special this place is to him. It's super special. So if we're simplifying and we're going off the book, I have a hard time thinking it's in New Mexico. Just like the point I brought up, oh, well, he always talks about Montana. I believe he wouldn't do that if it was hidden there, and it's what he doesn't say. Well, that would bring up Colorado as well, because he never mentions Colorado almost at all. There's only been a few mentions. So, anyways, I'm going to go through the book. So Robert Redford's book, I'll include Wyoming because it's in the southwestern part of Wyoming, but he did bring it up in Robert Redford's book, The Outlaw Trail, the one I just went through. It talks about Wyoming. And then, there's the Journal of a Trapper, which is talking about Yellowstone. And he talks about Flywater, he talks about the special places that he fished as a kid, under his father when he was guiding also. So a lot of the outside literature he brings in this also talks about the area, so it's kind of like a double whammy. But, I mean, you go through all the chapters in The Thrill of the Chase, you got the chapter In Love with Yellowstone. And he doesn't really talk about it, but he talks about the river, him trying to find rocks for marbles in these rivers, and, he loved the place. The Totem Cafe Caper, he's in West Yellowstone, and he's talking about hiding behind a tree, and, the big giant kettles used for making brown gravy, and they smell bad, and him washing the dishes formed deep canyons in his hand. Now, I believe that this chapter is really, really important, and he uses those visuals, talking about, working at the Totem Cafe. So again, West Yellowstone. My Brother Being Skippy talks about him landing his plane on Hebgen Lake. The Long Ride Home, he talks about getting kicked out of the car between Shoshone and Casper. Looking for Lewis and Clark, talking about going up in the mountains in Red Canyon, right by Hebgen Lake. In Buffalo Cowboys, they're 7 miles west of town in a sagebrush flat. And then the chapter Flywater, and talking about the Madison River, and I'm going to go through that really quick. So here's just one interesting thing that might be an aberration, might not. So what I thought was interesting in the preface, he states, and please don't fret too much if some of the things Please don't fret too much if some of the things I say don't appeal to you. Instead, keep in mind that the temperament of the country was different in the 1930s, when I was a tyke and wimpy hamburgers were a nickel. If it will bother you to read that I shot meadowlarks so my family could have food on the table, then please don't read further. So, just interesting. So he's talking about the 1930s, and then he also brings up talking about shooting meadowlarks. Well, I thought it was interesting is that the meadowlark was chosen as the state bird of Montana in the 1930s by a vote of school children of the state. So again, 1930s and meadowlarks, and that's the state bird for Wyoming in 1930 by school children. So might be an aberration, might be nothing. Who knows? Okay, so I already brought up in love with Yellowstone. He loved being up there in the summers. I absolutely love that place, and along the rivers, I could find the best agate rocks for making marbles. I was thinking about those things and even more, and talks about driving 50 miles down a little dirt road to a one-room schoolhouse. In the Totem Cafe caper, on the pic below the picture of the cabin, it says my one-room cabin in paradise. So this is his paradise. And then in the chapter Flywater, today, as my thoughts drifted by en route to new ideas to be tried and new experiences to be had, I pulled a long forgotten book from a shelf. It's called Flywater, and it is about the great fishing spots in the western part of the country. Several of the wonderful, colorful plates are places where I fished as a kid under the tutelage of my father, or where I guided others for pay when I was just a young teen. Those great places were personal secrets to me. And what I think is interesting is that in a span of like 2 paragraphs, maybe 3, he uses the word waters 4 times. Now I know that's why a lot of people think it's the Madison River and the Madison Junction, because later he talks about him setting one second him setting under a tree and writing by the Madison River and writing a note to his life. Like he says right here. But as I got older, I realized that there are many moments to remember, like the time I sat under a tree on the Madison River and watched osprey dive for fish as I wrote a note for my wife, who always allowed me the luxury of doing the things that I thought were important. So just how he talks about these places, right? I mean, it's how he talks about Yellowstone, in love with Yellowstone, and these wonderful places, and this is my paradise. So if we're simplifying, then it doesn't really make sense for me to look into a different state if this is where his heart's at. Now, I could be completely wrong, and there's probably a good chance that I am wrong. I have a 25% chance of being right, and I'm not a very good gambler. So, it's just how he talks about Yellowstone and Montana and the areas around this. He under the picture in Flywater, my secret fishing hole. So I'm going to go on to Too Far to Walk. And what I thought was interesting, I didn't bring that up. So back in the Thrill of the Chase, so in Flywater, the one I was just at, he tells us he's talking about his wife Peggy, we always used to take separate vacations so I could go visit, or so she could go visit her mother and talk about me, and I could go visit with my father and talk about our favorite fishing holes. So he brings up, she let me, we took many separate vacations, which I thought was interesting that he put that in there, because he also brings it up in Too Far to Walk. So this is really popular, I know, and I'm sure all you have heard this a million times, but in the preface of Too Far to Walk, it's, I think it's really important. So he says, praise and thanks must go to my wife Peggy, who, for 67 years, has quietly helped me through my life. It was 1946 when we started dating in high school. She has been a wonderful travel companion, and she always understood when I needed space, which reminds me of a trip I took many years ago. So he talks about putting a small rubber dinghy a few miles in the Madison River, a few miles from West Yellowstone, and fished downstream to Baker Hole. It was a forgotten part of Yellowstone Park. The river distance was 10 miles, and the best fishing in the bends were where the water turned greenish, deep, and beautiful. The small boat containing my camping gear was tethered to my boat as I leisurely walked in the quiet river. I spent 3 days there, casually casting my fly and enjoying its altitude. That river experience cemented my connection to that special country. Okay? That cemented his connection to that special country. We're looking for a special spot. So why would people not search in his, special country that cemented this whole trip, cemented, his connection to this place? Why would we be looking somewhere else if he keeps repeating that? And I'm going to keep going on. So in River Bathing is Best, he talks about his secret bathing spot. He'd ride his bike and it was 20 miles from town down a little dirt road, and he would jump in in this little pool of water. This hot water would run down into the river, and then he would sit there and he could move around and change the temperature with his body. So, it was a secret bathing spot. And then he goes on to say, several years ago, with my daughter Kelly's family, my wife and I drove to the little road, it's paved now, and walked to the river. I tried to get my granddaughters to swim where I spent so many peaceful hours. That idea didn't interest them much. That spot, which was so important to me 66 years ago, is mostly overlooked now by occasional passerby. My memories of those experiences are so dear that I hope in time my grandchildren will follow my footsteps to that special place. Isn't that interesting? So that spot that was so important to me 66 years ago, okay, is mostly overlooked now by the occasional passerby. To me, he's talking about the treasure spot now, where he hid the treasure chest, and he's using the story as telling this now. So maybe he found this place 66 years ago, and it was really important to him, but now it's mostly overlooked by the occasional passerby. My memories of those experiences are so dear to me that I hope in time all of my grandchildren will follow my footsteps to that special place. Is he talking about following his footsteps as in the poem to his special place where he hid the treasure chest? I think so. So again, he's telling us this place is so dear to me, so dear to me. How would I look in a different state? And I want to hear you guys' opinions. If something I said doesn't make sense, please tell me. So I'm going to continue to go on. So on page 197 of Too Far to Walk, well, it's the chapter called Treasures Galore. And this is where my whole name for the YouTube channel came up. Now I know there's a Facebook group called Treasures Galore, and it's a great name. This is when I was reading this, and I just got Once Upon a While. That's when I was, confirmation bias, but that's when it clicked in my head that yes, you need to start searching in Montana. This is where you need to focus your time and energy on. Because I had a Where Warm Waters Halt, but I said, no, that can't be it. That's probably too easy, although mostly everyone overlooks my Where Warm Waters Halt through the book. I thought the same thing. And then when I saw this, I was like, well, maybe that is the right Where Warm Waters Halt. Now, again, guys, I don't know where Warm Waters Halt is, and I'm going to tell you what my Where Warm Waters Halt is. And I went searching. I followed the clues, and I searched, and I failed. So in no way, shape, or form am I saying that I am right, and this is the right Where Warm Waters Halt. I'm just saying this was my last solve, and this is why, I believed it was there, because I believe it is in Montana, if that makes any sense. So Treasures Galore. We all know, well, maybe some of you don't, that Montana is the treasure state. So it says Montana is referred to as the treasure state because of its rich mineral reserves. Mining has been an I'm stumbling over my words, economic cornerstone of the state, and the state's motto, I'm not even going to say it, is Spanish for gold and silver. Refers to two of the minerals that gave rise to the nickname. So, treasures galore, Montana is the treasure state. And he talks about talking about cutting down trees. Well, another thing that I think is interesting is in The Thrill of the Chase, there's a picture of the cut stumps with the guy with the axe and the birds in the moon. Well, in this illustration too, this dude is climbing, has a rope tied to a tree stump on top of this cliff, and he's climbing it to get to this one little tree so he can chop it down. So kind of that illustration brings me back to the illustration in The Thrill of the Chase. But he's talking about how wonderful his experiences were. And I'm not going to read this all, but he's talking about being out there and smelling the wonderful smells and seeing the golden glow of rabbit brush and listening through the sounds of this canyon. When I think the least chipmunk makes a noise, and they're hiding berries for the winter. So he's talking about all these wonderful experiences, and he brings up golden and the word canyon. But the next page is what I really think is interesting, and I'm going to read it. And I know now there are costs. Every Montana evening, when I smashed a mosquito on my arm, 15 of his relatives came to the funeral. But the rewards of trapezing through the hills and canyon bottoms are winner-take-all proof of personal fulfillment to me. So, a couple key things. Every Montana evening. So he's in Montana in this. He's talking about Montana when he's talking about treasures galore. And he talks about, I smashed a mosquito on my arm and 15 of his relatives came to the funeral. Now remember that for later. But the rewards of trapezing through the hills and canyon bottoms are a winner-take-all proof of personal fulfillment to me. So he's talking about the reward of going through these canyon bottoms and hills are a winner-take-all. It's kind of like the treasure hunt, right? The rewards of going through the canyon or the canyon down, and the winner takes all. The person who finds the chest can have it. So I'm going to continue to read. If some of my friends think I'm wrong to be a distant dreamer, vaguely disinterested in many of life's modern habits, they could be correct. But wrong is one of the concepts that depend on witnesses, and that's why I'm always right when I'm alone in the mountains. I'll happily share my national forest with you, but please try to stay at least 20 miles away. So he's alone in the mountains, and he's talking about the national forest and staying 20 miles away from him. So maybe the treasure chest is hidden in a national forest. If he didn't have his name, he wouldn't have anything at all. Forest, national forest, maybe. So let's continue into part of walk. Of course, I'm going to go to this, chapter 39, heading north. Oh, actually, I'm going to backtrack. Go back to Treasures Galore. So in the illustration on that last page, you have him sitting under a tree with a backpack. Sitting under a tree with a backpack. Now, if you haven't watched my Blaze video, and it goes hand in hand with what I'm talking about now, about the treasure being in Montana. He has hinted so much at the blaze being a mark on the tree. And if it's not a mark on the tree, then he is using subterfuge, like big time. He's trying to mislead us big time. And go watch my Blaze video. I mean, there's 3 scrapbooks of him carving in his trees in his backyard. And what I thought was interesting in one of these, he was talking about the blaze, and he's like, oh, I could go to my backyard and show you, 1,000 blazes or whatever. Which I think is interesting because that's where all the scrapbooks, are from, is him carving in trees in his backyard, aspen trees. So I just thought this was interesting. Him sitting under a tree with a backpack. He always talks about hiding behind trees. Again, you need to check out my Blaze video. So many times he talks about hiding behind trees, markings in trees. And then, what was I going to say? Yeah, so marking in the trees and stuff like that, and hiding behind trees. And now he's sitting down with a backpack. And so he had to take a backpack to carry all the contents of the chest in. So him sitting under a tree with a backpack. Really, really interesting. Now I know a lot of you people don't agree with Blaze being that because it won't last the test of time. But again, I bring that up in my Blaze video, so go check it out. Okay, so chapter 39, heading north. And on top of the background of this page, it's big Montana. And he says the chapter is called Heading North. So I'm going to read. For many years, there was no greater freedom for me than going to the airport near Santa Fe and pushing open the hangar doors where I kept my Piper Malibu Mirage. Okay, so no greater freedom for him to do this. I would climb into the cockpit and crank up the engine, then head north, then for Colorado, Wyoming, or Montana, not knowing or caring where I'd land. My destination was not something I had to worry about for at least 600 miles. That completely eliminates Colorado in this. 600 miles would put you, past Colorado. So he didn't fly to Colorado. He he had to fly over Colorado, but he really didn't have to worry about where he was going to land until, 600 miles. I didn't have to use my radio after the wheels came up, and about 100 feet over the trees, I could see a lot of things disappear under my wings. Moose, grizzly bears, teepee rings, and cowboys riding behind a few head of cattle. I felt like John Wayne. So what I thought about this was it brought me back to the thrill of the chase when he's talking about, seeing his clearing, and it slowly disappeared under, 11 o'clock or his left-hand side. And then also he talks about, him flying over the funeral and disappearing that way. So it kind of brought me back to the thrill of the chase. So he talks about flying, and he'd land in Lander and rent a car, which there's no rental car place in Lander. Thanks to A Gypsy's Kiss, they figured that out. And he became friends with the 14-year-old attendant, and they went on the Aggie River and found arrowheads. So I'm going to continue to read. Lander was a beautiful little town where people were easy and the language was still country spoken. The next day I took off, and headed north again, looking for another adventure. In Cody, Wyoming, I visited the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. A few years later, I became a trustee of that great museum. I'm bragging when I say that everyone should go there on their way to Yellowstone, which is just 54 miles west. I don't remember any 4 days that I enjoyed more. Let me read the sentence before that. That trip to Wyoming was just one of the several I took without planning or worrying about what I would find. I don't remember any 4 days that I enjoyed more. So, he really enjoyed flying north, at least 600 miles. So now let me bring you to Once Upon a While. And of course, I am going to bring up the chapter Montana Golden. Montana Golden. So we have a chapter called Treasures Galore. Montana is the treasure state, and he's talking about Montana. Then he has this chapter called Montana Golden. He hid gold. What's a treasure state known for? Well, it's gold and silver. Montana Golden. Avalanche Lake was a fairy tale spot for me in the 1940s when I was young and could do anything. It was just a few miles north and west of where in 1959 a mountain fell and dammed the Madison River that formed Quake Lake. And then, he goes on to talk about him going up there, scared of grizzlies and fishing for golden trout. And what I thought was interesting is that he says, I placed my Dr. Pepper under a rock in the lake to save for the next time. No need to haul it out. So he places Dr. Pepper under a rock in the lake. So we know the treasure is not hidden in water, but he does say that the treasure chest is wet. Physics tells him that. So he placed a Dr. Pepper under his rock. So on the little caption at the end of this chapter, he says, the second night there was no smoke, but every time she slapped a mosquito, all of its relatives came to the funeral. There wasn't a third night. So it's the same line that he used. Now I get it. Mosquitoes are bad in water. There's a lot of water in Montana, lakes and streams and stuff like that. But he uses the same, every time I slapped a mosquito, all of his relatives came to the funeral. The same thing he uses in Treasures Galore. Treasure Galore, Montana Golden. And that's where, most of this clicked for me. Now, there's also another thing in Once Upon a While that I wanted to bring up, and I didn't mark it. So let me look through the book real quick. Here it is. So he's talking, this is in Algeron's relative, and he's talking about Montana, and he brings up the 7th Cavalry, which is also mentioned in The Thrill of the Chase. And it's talking about the Yellowstone campaign, and I'm just going to read the ending of this. The best book on the Custer fight, The Son of the Morning Star, was written by Evan Cornell, who was practically a hermit. Nevertheless, he never failed to walk down the hill from his house in Santa Fe and meet me for coffee at the Plaza Cafe. Both his memory and his golden words are 2 treasures that I will never hide. So 7th Cavalry, Yellowstone, both his memory and his golden words are 2 treasures I will never hide. So you got the word golden and treasures. Interesting. So that's about it in the books on why I think it's in Montana. There's a few other things that I wanted to bring up, like this picture. So if you take The Thrill of the Chase, and this is not an original idea, this has been out for a long time, and I'm sure most of you have seen this. But if you flip The Thrill of the Chase over and you look at this, it somewhat resembles the map. You got Utah, how it's cut off right here, right there. Then you got Idaho, which is bent a little bit. And then you got the treasure. Montana is known as the treasure state, known for its gold and silver, and this picture represents Montana, as in the gold. And again, that's not an original idea, but I do think it's interesting. Whether or not it holds any merit, I have no idea. So now I'm going to bring up a few logic points, and I don't really like using that word, but because people don't see it the way I see it. But to me, it makes sense, and we'll see what you guys think. So he's told us that he could not tell us the time he hid the treasure, or no, excuse me, he can't tell us when he found the spot where he hid the chest, because that would be too big of a clue. If he would tell us, I found it as a kid or an adult, that would be too big of a clue. Now, just think about that for a second. If he found the treasure chest, or the hiding spot, excuse me, I keep messing those things up. If he found the hiding spot when he was an adult, what states would that eliminate? None. He lives in New Mexico. He's made, he talks about flying his airplane to Wyoming and Montana. And, in the Cody interview, we know that he would drive up to Yellowstone a lot. And he probably drove, since he let his license expire, his pilot license expire. So we know that New Mexico, drove through Colorado, probably spent time there too, and drove through Wyoming, spent time there, a lot of time, and spent a lot of time in West Yellowstone and the Madison River. So if he found this spot when he was an adult, that would eliminate nothing and would not be a clue at all. But if he did find the hiding spot when he was a child, that would eliminate, in my opinion, New Mexico and Colorado. Now I know that he drove through Colorado, and maybe the spot was, on a route near there. But if you're looking, where they wouldn't have drove, then I believe that, that's probably not right. So if he found it when he was a kid, that would eliminate New Mexico and Colorado. If he found it when he's an adult, he traveled all 4 states as an adult, so that wouldn't eliminate anything. So logic, to me, tells me if that was a big clue, then obviously he found the spot as a child. He talks about his childhood experiences a lot in these books, a lot. His childhood meant a lot to him, and it helped shape him to who he is today. And then there's just a few other things too, like he was asked in an interview, could you take me to the treasure chest? And he asked, do you have a plane? I thought that was interesting. And then he talks about a car waiting outside of his house. And he says, I should have drove to Montana. Now, was he just kidding? Or was he saying, I should have drove up there if you really wanted to know? Or maybe he's just using subterfuge in that. Could be. And then another interview, he says, he talks about, I've given away too much already. He said, grizzly bears alone are dangerous. Well, there's no grizzly bears in Colorado or New Mexico. And then one last point that I forgot to bring up in the Thrill of the Chase is that in the chapter Goldenmore, the stamp postmark, now don't worry, I'm not too much into postmarks, but there could be something there. So in the chapter Goldenmore, the postmark says somewhere north of Santa Fe. So then there's two other postmarks that are very similar to that. And I believe in Looking for Lewis and Clark, the postmark is somewhere. No, it's not Lewis and Clark. There's two of them. I can't remember the chapters, but there's somewhere in Wyoming and somewhere in Montana. Those two postmarks. So that really resembles somewhere north of Santa Fe. Two similar postmarks of saying Wyoming and Montana. So these are just my thoughts. Like I said, I'm trying to just use the books to determine what state it could possibly be in. I know Forrest Fenn has told us countless times to start with where warm waters halt, and you're not supposed to figure out what state and then go through every possible where warm waters halt is in that state. That's completely wrong. That's not how you're supposed to do this. I just think this is an interesting topic to talk about, and me and Carter went over this, and I kind of want to just elaborate a little bit on my thoughts because I didn't get to go through everything. So this might be pointless, but when I'm reading the books, it seems very plausible to me that the treasure chest is hidden in the Wyoming-Montana area. In my opinion, mostly around West Yellowstone. Could be wrong, but the hints of Montana, not just Wyoming, are more prevalent. So that's why I feel like that, guys. Tell me what you guys think. If there's something that makes you think, New Mexico or Colorado or, those two states, let me know. I know there's a lot of things in the Thrill of the Chase that you could tie to New Mexico, like hiding or spreading Olga's ashes on Taos Mountain, and she had cancer, and that really resembles Forrest Fenn's life, and he's talking about a mountain in New Mexico, and then he's talking about my Spanish toy factory and his Spanish glass and how she would speak Spanish to him and he really wouldn't understand. So most of the Spanish stuff is in New Mexico and Colorado. Now there is some Spanish stuff in Wyoming and Montana area, but not prevalent as much as New Mexico and Colorado. And yeah, that's all I got, guys. Tell me what you think. If you do have something, let me know. I would love to hear it. And I'm open. Like I say all the time, I'm a failed searcher. We all are. I do not know anything. And if you want to have a discussion with me and tell me this is why I think it's here, then let's do it, because I will change my mind in a heartbeat if you can show me something that would lead me, down south. If you could show me anything. And just because he doesn't talk about, Colorado, that doesn't mean that it's a hint. What if he's saying, it's not in Colorado, guys. I'm not even going to say it's in there because he has no ties, really, besides his daughter going to college there, I believe, and him buying a condo. He also mentions he wish he could have got a honorary, college degree from some small college in Colorado. And he talks about, I believe it's Pagosa Springs in Once Upon a While, the museum there. Now, I might be wrong on that, but he's talking about a museum in Colorado. There might be another reference to Colorado, but those are the only ones that are coming off the top of my head right now. So let me know what you guys think, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I said, subscribe to the House Husband Diaries channel. we're going to be going live and going over the most important topic we could ever talk about, where warm waters halt. And so we're going to go over the book, what the book says, any possible idea of where warm waters halt that we see in the book. We're going to go over it, and we're going to go over quotes. What has Forrest Fenn told us about this spot? There's some interesting quotes that I think and Carter thinks. We're going to go over those. We're going to go over everything. So this is going to be probably the most important video that we could ever do, and so you don't want to miss it. So go subscribe to him, and then we're going to probably set up a date. It's probably going to be Sunday night or Tuesday, where we're going to do live videos probably once a week. So that's to come. It probably won't happen for another month or so. This is a busy month. So anyways, go subscribe. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. I'm going to do live videos on my channel also once we get all the bugs worked out, and then we're going to jump back and forth on each other's channel. So subscribe. I hope to see you guys in the live chat, and I will catch you guys in another video.